Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Don't Mind Us. I am your host, LaShayla, and I'm here with my co-host, Lewis. Say what's up, Lewis.
Hey, what's up? I was gonna just let you do the intro. I didn't want to interrupt with a welcome back because I'm excited to be back.
We're both excited.
I'm so excited. It's been 7 months, right?
Yeah, it's been about 7 or 8 months. It's been an interesting 7 or 8 months, to say the least. So many things have changed. And I think it's just wild right now to be sitting here in our new studio,
Yes.
You know, we're not where we usually are. And it's so, I'm just excited to get back, get my feet wet. You know what I'm saying? Get back into the podcast, talking about important things, you feel me? Because that's what people need to hear, period.
Look, you mentioned the new studio. This is soundproof. It's nice. It's just us. There's no worry about, people coming in, people going out. This feels nice. It's our space right now, LaShayla. It's so nice. And the last time we did a podcast, it was the best of 2018. Yeah. We're 3/4 or something of the way through.
It's about to be the best of 2019 once we finish this episode.
It's about to be the best of 2019. Like, in a few episodes, we're going to be doing our best of 2019 or something like that.
Yeah, but I mean, look, you have to trust the process and respect the growth. Because I guarantee you guys, we have grown since January of 2019. We are different people now.
Especially becoming roommates.
Oh, yeah. So we might as well just get started, honestly. So, Lewis, what have you been up to the past 7 or 8 months, really?
I moved in with you.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I did.
I completely forgot.
I think that was back in March.
Wow.
We all moved in together. It's really nice. And then I'm still at the same job, but some new opportunities are approaching.
New opportunities.
That's what we're about. I'm trying to think. I see on the outline you have new friendships. Not the case for me, I don't think.
Oh.
Yeah.
For me, yeah. But we're going to get into that.
Yeah. Not for me. I'm still sticking with the same friends, And
A1 since day one.
A1 since day one. And then I haven't really done anything a lot. I was kind of in a first half of the summer droll. I was kind of, complacent, and I didn't know what to do in the first half of the summer, but things are picking up. We're starting the podcast again.
And this time, I promise you, there won't be a 7-8 month break. We're going to be on it, It might not be
every week,
but we have something cooking up. I promise you guys. I mean, you may have noticed that, a different person is starting the intro. I'm, we're co-hosting, but we're shaking up things. We're changing things. Like I said, we both grown in those last 7-8 months, and I wanted to try my shot at hosting. Improving. So,
and you're driving this. I'm here for the ride.
Awesome.
That's what I'm here for.
Awesome. All right. So for me, it's been about the same. Got new roommates, which is awesome. I'm sure Remy is enjoying it. Remy's my dog, by the way. Got some new friendships, from school and whatnot. We did a whole semester without this podcast, so that's a new development. We went through a whole semester of college without really, I guess,
discussing what's going on in our
around
lives?
us. Yeah, so a whole 6 months, 5 months, I guess, just went by, and we didn't bother to get on the mic and tell you guys about it. But that changes today.
We're in front of mics now.
We're in front of mics in a studio.
The only thing that has really changed is now we have mics in front of our face, because in the past 7 months we've still had these kind of conversations.
Yeah,
but really the only thing that's changed is we're now actually recording with mics in front of our face.
Because we thought it was important for y'all to hear it. Exactly. And here we are. You see, LaShayla, can I give a quick shout out to you? For why? Yes. But why?
I'm just saying, we're all about positivity here. Mm-hmm. And I was just thinking, the podcast is starting back up, and you're doing incredible graphics for each episode.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
Incredible.
Watch out for that, guys.
It makes me want to click on each episode. No bias or anything, just because I'm on it.
Yeah, might want to. Yeah.
I think the graphics look great.
Thanks for the 1 listens.
And you know what, that'll grow.
Yeah.
That'll grow. And I'm excited because we're having our own projects and we're kind of intersecting them. I've got that website, and now you're the driving force behind this. You're the host on this podcast, and you're doing the graphics and editing and all that. And then that'll go up on the site, and it's going to be exciting. Like,
yeah, I mean, speaking of, like, before, it might have been Lewis introducing, but we both decided, like, hey, why don't I just kind of take over a little bit? And we both got our own thing going on. Lewis has his website. Shout out to Halftime Journal. Make sure you guys check that out. Follow it on Facebook, Twitter, please. And we got the podcast going on. Working on that. And sometimes Lewis might not be here to record, but that's okay.
That's okay.
Because the podcast still stands. All right.
And we stand the podcast.
So how was your summer? We just got today. Okay. So a little bit of background. Today is indeed the day we're recording is the first day of
the semester,
the fall 2019 semester of our college lives. Mm-hmm. And today was a day, but I want to hear, how was your summer?
So my summer, as I mentioned it briefly, the first half, a little droll. I was a little complacent, kind of in a dark place. I was transitioning from one job into full-time into another, and that was kind of sucky, especially because the one job I left is one I really cared about, and, going into a job that I just really had to put my head down, make some money over the summer, save up for school, but then, I think the second half of the summer really picked up when I, created Halftime Journal.
Yep.
And we talked about that even before I started it up and everything like that. You were just kind of helping me, think of ideas and maybe, in my mind, just pushing me a little bit. So, second half of the summer picked up with Halftime Journal. And then another opportunity where I could be in more studios like this, which would be nice. It's a little tease. I don't know, nothing's final or official or anything like that. So, yeah, that's going to be nice. Like, I feel like the second half of the summer is way better to me than the first half, and that's a good thing heading into the semester. I feel like I'm in a better place than what I was at the beginning of the summer. So, and especially, started day one of the fall 2019 semester, and it was interesting day. You're catching up with friends that you've missed over the summer. Your old classmates that you happen to be in the same class with, and you're just kind of like, oh, hey, what's up? And it's supposed to be syllabus day, but syllabus day dies in the first year of college, and in high school that dies, and then you just go right into lecture.
Chapters 1 through 15.
Yeah, you
give a test tomorrow, so please be prepared.
Exactly. I have homework.
Yep.
Yeah, that's just, I can't complain about that. We're juniors. We're juniors in college.
Yep, juniors in college. Fun.
Yeah, that's kind of my summer. I feel like the second half was way better than the first half, as I mentioned, but I'm interested in how your summer was.
My summer was it was pretty slow, to say the least, but it was slow in a way that I liked it. I had one summer class, took physics over the summer, and I had class Monday through Friday in the mornings, and then I would go to work in the afternoons for the most part. And the same as you, I would say in the past 7 months, I quit a job that I really liked, started a new one. Didn't like that one, started a new one, and I'm kind of chilling with that one for right now. I think that's just kind of the process we all kind of go through. But my summer was, for the most part, pretty slow, just really focusing on myself this summer, a lot of self-care, changing up my skincare routine, my hair routine, just working on myself. And of course, the number one thing I did this summer that really went into my self-care routine was watching Moonlight. I watched Moonlight 7 times this summer because I love it so much.
Okay, so when you say you watched Moonlight 7 times, it reminds me of when my brother watched Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift 7 times in the theater. Yeah, but this is obviously a much better movie than Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift.
I wouldn't know. Well, I would know because Moonlight is the best movie ever, but yeah.
Yeah, there you go. We'll get more into that, I guess. Yeah. But that's so interesting because I feel like the podcast is now taking a new identity, almost. Still us, still kind of having these conversations, but it's more than music now.
It's yeah, you're right. So it's like, it's more than music. It's more. At first, I think we started off because we both had that similar interest in music, but then we realized that we could have more conversations. And I definitely, when I decided to kind of just take on the podcast, I definitely want to kind of move it in a different direction and broaden it a little bit and talk about things that I deem, or not I, but I think people, our age and people deem as important, things that people want to hear and are talking about right now. So whether that be culture, whether it be pop culture, whether it be music, whether it be film, whether it be just something happen socially right now and possibly politically, just something that we can have a conversation about that we always talk about when we're in our kitchen, just chilling, and it's like 12 o'clock at night. Well, we all of us just, go into a long 3-hour conversation. And I think it was like important to bring those conversations in front of a mic to an audience.
Exactly. Yeah, because we've talked about Moonlight.
Oh yeah, we talked about Moonlight. So a little history on that. So I'm glad you brought up Moonlight, because today we will be talking about Moonlight. Today's the day. So we're coming up on the 3rd anniversary of Moonlight premiering at the Telluride Film Festival, and it premiered September 2nd, 2016. And we decided, why not make a podcast about it? And then recently, IndieWire actually named it the top film of the decade. So not the year, not the last 5 years, but the decade. And so Moonlight being my favorite film, I said, Lewis, we have got to talk about it. And we've, like you said, we've had a lot of conversations about Moonlight. We've talked about the importance of this film, but we hadn't done it in front of a mic. No. So now we got to do it in front of a mic. Yeah. Because we have to share. Everybody needs to know this movie. And it's wild because we're coming up, 2 years on its Oscar win, and people still don't know it. All right? So yeah, so this episode, we're basically gonna kind of give you a breakdown of Moonlight, and then we're gonna get started. So to start off the episode, I know it sounds like we started, but we didn't. But to start off the episode, Lewis, I want to know, what was something positive to you that happened to you in the past week?
In the past week, I think it's this new opportunity I talked about, maybe one to where I'm either producing a show for a radio station. We'll see how that plays out. Nothing's official yet, of course, but I think just that little glimpse of hope, because I am a mass communications major. So obviously having something in that field, even if it is just something a little bit on the side, having that opportunity, even if it doesn't come to fruition or it's not official or anything like that, just, having that interview or having that small job shadow I did, I think that's a positive that happened to me in the past week. Also, what I was thinking about is how in the summer I got really sick with my stomach and everything like that. And I just want to be positive about now that I feel like I can eat whatever I want again. So I'm very happy about that. So I feel like my stomach can hold food now, and that's one positive thing that I thought about in the past week. Just, I'll put the opportunity to the side because it's amazing, and I talked about it already. But eating whatever I want is great.
Yep.
I love it. I love it. So
tried that Popeye's chicken sandwich yet?
I haven't tried the Popeye's chicken sandwich yet. No, I haven't tried it, and I've been asking everyone if they tried it because I feel like I'm tasting it vicariously through everybody else. Like whoever I'm talking to or whatever I see on social media, that's my taste of the Popeye's chicken sandwich.
As a vegetarian, I do the same thing. I ask people how it tastes, and if someone may have it, I might sniff it, but I'm not gonna taste it. I feel like I can kind of get an idea of it, but
that's where the future's headed.
Yeah,
you only have to smell food items to get that sensation of eating food. That's the future.
Just gotta sniff it.
Yeah, that's really good. That's a really good chicken sandwich.
I've mastered this, after being vegetarian for over a year and a half now. So
it's mastered. Yeah. So I talked about one positive thing. What was one positive thing for you?
Well, I have multiple things.
Okay, good. No, positive things.
So this is kind of outside the scope of the question, but I'm gonna say it anyway. So because we haven't recorded in 7 months, but one thing that happened in the past couple months was back in in June, we went to see Anderson .Paak. So me, Paige, and Lewis, we went to New Orleans to see Anderson .Paak, No Name, and Thundercat, and that was my second time seeing No Name because I love No Name. I'm also positive that me seeing No Name is a new development since I left the podcast. But yes, I've seen her twice. She's my favorite rapper. You guys already know this. Check out episode 4. No Name. No, episode 3. Sorry, No Name is a genius.
No Name is a genius. That is what the episode is called.
Because we stan. Anyway, absolutely. So that was my second time seeing No Name, and that was just. First, it opened up with Thundercat, who's incredibly talented, and then, we had No Name for about an hour or so, and then Anderson .Paak comes out, and this dude is, like, crazy talented. Like, his I don't know, his, like, endurance was, like, ridiculous. Like, he danced the entire, like, he had a stage, like, he had stairs where he had to go up on his drum set, either play the drum or he would run down and sing, or at one point he was in the audience and get this he was in the audience dancing with Janelle Monáe.
Look, I'm so...
And we had no idea. It was her and Gabrielle Sidibe, and we had no idea that they were in the audience until we saw Janelle Monáe's snap story that same night. And guess what? So that night was also New Orleans Pride, and Janelle Monáe came down to New Orleans for the parade. And afterwards, after the Anderson .Paak concert, Lewis just looks salty right now.
I feel empty.
There was an after party that Anderson .Paak told us everybody to come through, and we had no idea, and we didn't find out. We didn't find out until we got back to our homes, like 2.5 hours away, that we could have been partying with Janelle Monáe and Anderson .Paak. But look, that was a positive thing that happened in the past 3 months.
A positive thing. I'm just thinking I've completely forgot about the Anderson .Paak concert, and I shouldn't have, because that was, if not the highlight, like one of the highlights of my summer, because that was so great. Like,
yeah, that was definitely the highlight.
Like, I've only been to 2 concerts, and granted, those were big scale concerts. I'm talking, I went to California to see The Weeknd, and who opened up for The Weeknd? Jhené Aiko and Schoolboy Q. Then I went to Houston and saw Beyonce.
I've only been to 2 concerts, but it was Beyonce.
But it was Beyonce and The Weeknd.
That's like me saying I've only flown once, but it was to Paris.
And
which is true. Anyway.
Not to make it a LaShayla went to Paris podcast.
Yeah.
But that's so crazy. I didn't even mention that. But the fact that there was an after party, I remember the next morning we were in the kitchen just like
sad.
I
was sad for a couple of days.
Yes.
Like, I just got sad now just thinking about it.
Yeah, you can just shut it off. It's fine. No, it's okay. It's okay. We're here to talk about positive things. So,
but yeah, so that was a positive thing that happened, I would say, within the last 3 months. I got to see Anderson .Paak up close. Well, we weren't that close, but we were pretty close.
It was good.
And he, like I said, he came through the crowd, and that was probably one of the best performances I've ever been to, for sure. I haven't been to any like super huge, but that was definitely the largest artist, probably the most well-known artist that I've seen, and he definitely put on a show. Like, he had like 3 outfit changes. Like, he was getting it. He was getting it. And at one point, the Free Nationals performed "Beauty in Essex," that song featuring a person and who may or may not be canceled right now, but
pending.
It was just an amazing show, and I think it was a good night overall.
It was
a good night. And so I would say something positive that maybe happened in the last week was probably, besides getting ready for the podcast, of course, I organized my room, which is self-care.
Yeah, I was about to say the self-care thing is...
Yeah, we all... You guys know who Marie Kondo is, hopefully. I don't know if you do, but... She's like this person, and she has a show on Netflix, and she's basically going in helping people reorganize their lives. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to reorganize my life, get my life together, and I'm going to KonMari, which is the word they use. I'm going to KonMari my room. And so I did that, got rid of a lot of things, donated some stuff, organized my life, organized, and really just kind of mentally prepared myself for the semester coming up because I knew it was going to be a hard semester. Like you said, we were juniors, and it only gets harder from here. So I just had to mentally prepare myself for the semester coming up, and the one of the ways I knew how to do that was to organize my room and organize, the office and just really get ready. And another thing is this podcast and, watching Moonlight an eighth time, because I've watched it 8 times altogether, but I've seen it 7 times this summer. Or no, yes, 6 times this summer, I think.
Because you watched it last night.
Yes, I watched it last night. So I've seen it 8 times altogether.
When do we count the end of the summer? That's the question.
I would say before Labor Day.
Okay.
Because Labor Day is next week.
So 8 times this summer.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I've seen it 8 times. Well, I've seen it 7 times this summer, but technically I've seen it 6 times this summer.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
I saw it once a couple years ago, another time in April, which was like the spring, and then 6 times this summer.
Okay.
So 8 times altogether. So I'm glad we started talking about it. I brought it up. But anyway, we are coming up on the 3rd year anniversary of Moonlight, and I just kind of wanted to really talk about it. I want to discuss what makes it such an important film today and really just kind of break down all of the things happening in the movie that some people may have not caught, or just things that, like you said, we've discussed like at random, like midnight in the kitchen.
Yeah, and interpretations.
Stuff
what
like
that,
what was happening when Barry Jenkins, decided to, or what was going through his mind, I guess, when he put together this project. I mean, I don't really know, but this summer I definitely kind of dived into that and dived into listening to a bunch of interviews with him. I watched his short film, My Josephine, which came out when he was in film school, and that was something he was known for. So I think we should dive into it. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, so Moonlight, the best movie ever. Like I said, it did recently IndieWire, which is a well-known, like a film review.
Yeah.
It's pretty credible. Like, it's pretty, I don't want to say, is it prestigious, kind of?
I think it's well known. I think it's known.
It's well known.
It's known. Like, if you say IndieWire, some people would be like, yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, like I read reviews on that. Well, recently they did a whole list of, was it the 100 best movies, and Moonlight, was at the top. So, Moonlight originally started as a play written by Terrell Alvin McCraney, who is a man who grew up in Liberty City, Miami, which is where the movie takes place. That's the setting of the movie. And he grew up with a mother who was addicted to crack cocaine, and he also grew up as a gay black man in that community. And I believe, I don't have it written down, but from the top of my head, I do think that he was trying to, his mother had recently passed, and this was like the early 2000s, I think around like 2003 maybe, and he was applying to the Yale School of Drama, I believe, and he had to write a play, and that was in the play that came out of that was In Moonlight Black Boys Look Blue. And I believe what happened, about 13 years went by, and somehow through people they knew, Barry Jenkins received that play. But before I get there, I'm just going to kind of mention, some of the things that Terrell Alvin McCraney has going on. So he's also the chair of playwriting at the Yale School of Drama. He wrote In Moonlight Black Boys Look Blue, which is an Oscar-winning. He got an Oscar for Best Screenplay, I believe, adapted screenplay. He created a show. He also wrote the screenplay for High Flying Bird, which is on Netflix. Lewis wrote about it. Check that out. Have Time Journal. Yeah, and he created and wrote a show that actually recently premiered on the Oprah Winfrey Network called David Makes Man. I saw the first episode, and I definitely recommend people going to watch it because he's such a talented writer, and he has done so many more things. He has written, produced, and acted, and so many other things. Like, it was so many things just didn't list them all, And so Barry Jenkins also grew up in Liberty City, Miami. He also had a mother who was addicted to crack cocaine. He is a straight man, but it's funny because they grew up in the same city and they never knew each other. And so somehow Barry Jenkins got the script, got this play that Terrell Alvin McCraney wrote from mutual friends. And I believe it was about 13 years later that he may have gotten the script. And someone said, this isn't about you, but it's about you. And if you watch any Barry Jenkins interview, whenever he's describing that process of how he received that play, he'll mention that. Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting how, kind of like the duality, we remember that word from Us.
Yeah, duality. Oh, we even missed the Us cycle for this podcast. So duality was a big theme.
Right.
Us. Yeah.
So just kind of like the duality and like how they both grew up in similar situations, not the exact same situation, but it's just so interesting because they never knew each other, and like how the universe works to where these two men who grew up in the same city had very similar experiences growing up, both had mothers addicted to crack cocaine, and eventually Barry Jenkins would be writing and directing an Oscar-winning play that Terrell Alvin McCraney wrote. So I think that's something really interesting. And Barry Jenkins, he got attention for his movie Medicine for Melancholy, which I believe came out in 2008, which was 8 years prior to Moonlight. So he went about 8 years. And fun fact, he also, directed and wrote the screenplay for the movie If Beale Street Could Talk. And he wrote this at the same time that he wrote Moonlight. But he didn't have the rights to the James Baldwin novel, If Beale Street Could Talk. So I thought that was interesting. All right, so do you have anything to add on to that?
I was just thinking of the first time I watched this movie and the kind of just emotional response I had to it. You talked about Barry being a straight man. I'm a straight man, and the thing is like, I think what this movie really does well is just authenticity. It's just you're watching real people, and I feel like this movie brings a lot out of, it brings a lot out of you. It's just like really emotional. I remember watching it for the first time, and I think the third act is one of the best third acts I've ever seen in a movie. I get, every time I think about Moonlight, I get transported to the first time I watched it in my living room of like my old apartment, and just watching it, Paige is next to me, and we've heard watch Moonlight. It's one of the best movies of the year. I was like, all right, we got to watch this. And then I wasn't ready for, we're going to unpack all of it, but I wasn't ready for everything that came with Moonlight, and it's fantastic. That's what I think of when I think of Moonlight. I think of the first time I saw this, before even knowing about all the technical stuff behind it, the way the camera moves, the way the music acts within the thing. Like, I think, it really is one of the best movies of the decade, but we could talk about that. Yeah.
And I think we're going to kind of give like a quick little summary of the movie just for the people. So spoiler alert, warning.
It's been 3 years. You should watch it.
It has been 3 years. It's accessible. It's on Netflix.
Should we just give like, you gave the warning, and then you could stop the podcast right now and go watch it, return to this.
Yeah, stop the podcast right now.
But return back to it.
Go watch it and return back. So I'm going to kind of just get into the summary. All right. So we start off with chapter 1, and this movie is split up into different chapters because I believe the play wasn't originally, the play was one day. It was a day in the life of 3 different people, but we didn't know, I believe, until the end of the play that those 3 people were the same person, which I think is brilliant. I like that. I would love to see it. I would like to see it. But Barry Jenkins decided to split this up into 3 separate acts. So the first chapter, we have Little, and it opens up with, Juan, who is the neighborhood drug dealer, going to like check on his like drugs, I guess, and yeah, that's just the opening scene. And then we see a young child being chased by bullies, and they're calling him, all kinds of homophobic slurs. He ends up running to a crack house, an abandoned crack house, to hide out there. And he's eventually found by that neighborhood drug dealer, Juan. And the boy who was running, his name is Little. Or people call him Little. It's Chiron. That's his name. And I just kind of wanted to make a comment about, like, when he met Juan. I just wanted to make a comment about the person who plays Little, which is Alex Hibbert. At the time, I believe he was 12. And I just kind of wanted to say how amazing his acting was. Just like the fact that throughout the movie is very silent, and he doesn't, there's not a lot of dialogue, happening between the two. And it's mainly Juan just kind of asking him questions like, hey, like, can you tell me your name? And he's just looking, but his looks say so much, and I just have to like top off my hat to like him.
Yeah, shout out to Alex Hibbert.
Shout out to him. And so it goes through that. Eventually Juan brings him to get food. He asks him some questions. Like I said, he doesn't really say much until I think the first time he speaks is when Juan brings him to his house to meet his girlfriend Teresa. They feed him again, and that's when that's the first time we see Little actually speak, and he looks up. I think that's also the first time he looks up, which I thought was really interesting. And so we see that, and then Little sleeps over. He sleeps over that night. And the next day it goes to kids playing in a field, and I thought this scene was really important because this is the first scene the character Kevin is introduced, and we will later find out that what Kevin's purpose is in the movie. And it's little boys playing around, they're horsing around, and then Kevin and Chiron or Little, they end up horsing around and falling on the ground, and just kind of like they were horse playing and wrestling. And from just watching it's two young men just messing around. There's nothing. It has like a sense of like asexuality to it, but we also see how it's kind of like it's so interesting how they use that also to kind of develop Chiron's sexuality in a way, even though there's nothing sexual about it. But in a way, still like these two children, because you can't really attach children to sex at this age, but there's still like a sense of asexuality about it, and yet the Chiron sexuality is developing, and we see that in this scene, which is the first scene with Kevin.
Yeah, developing is a key word here, because this is the beginning. They want you to show the stages of Chiron's life, and these little moments are what maybe develops who Chiron is. It defines who Chiron is, So it's I guess like showing these little moments. It's like you don't sexualize it or anything like that. But these are just normal events that occur. So and it's just a nice moment too. Just a bunch of boys horse playing. That's just what happens. And development keyword.
All right, and so we go to the next scene, which is probably one of the more important scenes of the movie, which is the scene where it starts off with Juan finding Little at his house. He pulls up to his house, and Little's just kind of sitting there, and they go to the beach. And the beach scene, if anybody's seen Moonlight, they know the beach scene.
This is it.
Yeah, this is it. So in this scene, Juan is teaching Little how to swim. And in many of the interviews I watched with Barry Jenkins, he talks about how it's such an important thing that these two a black man is teaching a black boy how to swim in the Atlantic Ocean. And he always says, we know the history with black people and the Atlantic Ocean, i.e. the transatlantic slave trade, right? And so it's just such I don't want to say revolutionary, but it's such an important scene in this, and it also acts as sort of a baptism, because Juan has become this mentoring figure by now, because now Little feels comfort in finding solace in Juan's home. And even though Juan is this drug dealer, like a lot of times in movies, drug dealers are depicted as these evil people who want to ruin their communities. And here you see this quote unquote drug dealer teaching this little boy how to swim, being a father figure to this young man. And on top of that, this like these black people, like the love between black men. And that's kind of establishing that, that's kind of establishing Little's like relationships with black men, I would say, because he doesn't have his father's not in his life. So I think that was beautifully depicted.
And I've read and heard Juan's almost this godlike figure to Little, and then you mentioned the baptism, the beach scene, almost acting like that, where he's teaching him how to swim. Also, the scene's important, as you mentioned, for kind of breaking stereotypes. And I think if you haven't heard of IndieWire, you've definitely heard of Rotten Tomatoes. And Rotten Tomatoes recently did a poll of the 21 most important scenes of the decade, like movie scenes of the decade. And, people voted in, and Moonlight came at number 10. And I was looking through it, and Moonlight was maybe one of two of the top 10 moments that were truly... It was truly original. It wasn't any franchise. It wasn't this big production behind it or anything like that. It wasn't attached to anything.
It was independent.
It was independent. And that says something in itself, that you can create this important scene without any like name recognition or anything like that. So that just goes to show how great this scene is.
Yeah, it's an amazing scene, and bravo, Barry Jenkins, bravo.
Good job, Barry Jenkins.
All right, so we go to the next. So that night, Juan brings him home, and before we were introduced to Little's mother, and she was concerned, after her child spent the night at a stranger's house. But it seems like she wasn't too concerned. It was very weird, but I think there we kind of at that point we got a hint that she was on drugs, because Juan mentioned that he found Little at what he said was a hole, which is a crack house, and she kind of just, the look in her eyes, and Naomi Harris is a wonderful actress, and just a look in her eyes, you could tell it was a sense of familiarity with that area, with that crack house. So going after the swimming scene, he goes back home, and she's there with a random man that clearly Little doesn't know. And she goes in her room, and she just like, kind of completely disregards her child being there. And so right here, we start to see the stages of her addiction and how it's starting to advance a bit more. So the next day, Little's at school, right? And this is probably one of the more, because I would say each scene has something, each chapter, not scene, but each chapter, I believe, has something kind of important or integral to it that really develops Chiron's sexuality. And so in this scene, we have Chiron walks into a restroom, and in the restroom, it's like all like young kids, and they're in a circle, and they're looking in their pants. They're looking at their penises, and so it's really interesting, because I feel like this is something children do, like even though it's kind of like a taboo and we don't really talk about it, but I feel like that seems so interesting, because I feel like it really is something that kids do. Even though I'm not a 12-year-old boy, I still feel like I've heard stories like that, or I've been around people who have said that's something similar to what they have experienced growing up. And I think those things do kind of have a way in how do kind of say something about like our sexuality, and how they definitely, and how our sexuality begins to develop, regardless of like, not saying that they don't like, I'm not saying they change your sexuality. Right. I'm saying that it speaks to how your sexuality is developing at that young age, because at that time they don't see it as something sexual. They're just kind of kids exploring, and so they're just really just being curious about it. It's
another one of those small moments, like the horseplay scene that you mentioned earlier. It's another one of those small moments.
Right. And so then we go to, Little. He's at his house, and we kind of talked about this once, about subtle ways in which directors and in films, how they find things to tell us something else. They show something else that's not a direct like, hey, this is happening, but it's a subtle thing that's showing that something is happening. So we go to the scene, and Little, he gets home from school, and he boils a pot of water, and usually what that means is the hot water's cut off. So he boils a pot of water and pours it in a tub, and that's the first time I would say that he sits in that tub, and he just kind of rests, he just kind of leans back, and I would say that's the first time he seems at peace. And I thought that was a very important part of that chapter, is we never, I think until then, we don't really see him at peace. We see him in different states. He's kind of afraid, not sure, questioning, curious, but he's never just like at peace.
Right.
I feel in that chapter, and that's the first time he seems at peace. And so we go to later on that night where Juan is in his drug area, just kind of like patrolling, and then he finds Little's mother. And in that scene, which was a beautiful scene between Mahershala Ali and Naomi Harris, and he walks up on her and he catches her doing crack, and he's just kind of like, what are you doing? Like he pulls her out the car, he's questioning what she's doing, and just kind of questioning like her as a mother, not directly, he doesn't say it, but just in the actions and I guess what he's doing. And so she poses a question. She's like, are you gonna raise my son now? She's like, so you gonna raise? And he's like, are you gonna raise him? And she's like, are you gonna keep selling me rocks? And the look he gives her, because it's such a conflict, an internal conflict between them, because he knows that this is something that he's doing. This is something but this is also how he makes a living. This is how he feeds his family.
Yeah, and that again, that's the conflict. Is I have to make a living, but it's at the expense of maybe Chiron's life at home. Mm-hmm. So that's what's tough.
Right, and so here is this man who's kind of taken on her child and became this father figure to him. And he's also the reason why his mother can't be a mother to him. And it's just like, whoa. So then that kind of leads into the next scene where Chiron, he comes and he visits Juan, and, Juan sits him at the table, and he asks Juan, which is probably one of the more important. I probably said that 3 times, but I would say probably
everything's important.
Yeah, everything's important in this movie. So he asks Juan, he says, what is a faggot? Which is the first time he talks in that scene. And Juan's just like, he kind of, like his eyes kind of drop. And he's like, a word used to make gay people feel bad. And he's like, don't let people call you that, blah, blah, blah. And so then Little asks, do you sell drugs? And I really like that scene because Mahershala Ali, first of all, this is the only chapter that he appeared in, and he won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. Mm-hmm. And that's just how amazing he is, because you look at this tall, like 6-something man, and whenever he's asked that question, it looks like the air is just knocked out of him. And I'm just like, oh my goodness. Like, this man took words on a page and turned it into him being this person. Like, if I had only seen him in that movie and I've seen him in something else, I'd be like, whoa, I would expect him to be like Juan. If I would have met him in person, like if I hadn't seen like interviews and stuff, I would expect him to be like Juan, because the way he portrays him is so real and so authentic. Yeah. And just like he took these words on a page, these notes, these directions on a page, and just he killed it on that scene. And he puts his head down, he looks down, he nods, and Little asks, is my mama on drugs? My mama, she's on drugs, right? And it looked like the air is knocked out of him twice in that scene.
Look, it's hard to have a better performance in such a short amount of time than you can have with Mahershala Ali. As you mentioned, he won an Oscar, Best Supporting Actor, and only being in like 30 minutes of the movie. Yeah. Like that just speaks to what he did with that character and bringing Juan to life, really. And yeah, those, without saying any words, you can just feel it. Mm-hmm. So it's great that you mentioned that, because
and so here's this little kid just knocking down this tall man, and he nods again, doesn't really say anything, and that's the last time we see Juan in the movie. So he leaves, and then we go on to the next chapter, and in the next chapter we have 16-year-old Chiron, played by the amazingly talented Ashton Sanders, and we see him sitting in school. He's sitting at his desk staring at another boy's lips, and the teacher interrupts. He's like, hey, pay attention. There's a bully. I honestly don't know the bully's name. I never picked up on it. And I'm pretty sure they said it once, like, because the teacher said the name. I forgot.
We don't support bullies.
Yeah, we block. Yeah. Bullies are canceled.
We just did it right here on the podcast.
So before I start with chapter 2, I do want to mention how I did not mention that. Oh, I didn't mention this. Okay, well, before the before Little goes to talk to Juan, the night before, his mom screams at him, and it's kind of inaudible because they cut out the sound. And that scene was just, he's just like standing in the doorway, and his mom's just like in the hallway, and she like screams at him, and we don't know yet what he said, but that scene appears again later on in the movie, and we find out what she says.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so he's bullied, and so school, his bully is just like, he left his tampon in, whatever, blah blah blah. And so school ends. He is waiting outside. He's trying to like avoid the bullies, and then in comes teenage Kevin, who's played by Jerome, who also who is at the moment who just got nominated for an Emmy for outstanding lead actor in a limited series, When They See Us, created by Ava DuVernay. Sorry, I just had to plug her. I love her.
Plug away.
And he's waiting. He's just kind of watching the bullies from a distance, I guess, trying to avoid him. And then Kevin walks in. He's wondering why Kevin's there so late. Kevin explains that he was caught with some girl in the hallway having sex. And in this interaction, which is all the people that play Chiron are just like ridiculous. Like, it's just amazing because they don't say anything. Like, they barely talk. Like, Chiron does not have much lines in this entire movie. And so you see Ashton Sanders just kind of like listening to what Kevin's saying. Like, Kevin's like, yeah, I was just caught with this trick in the stairway, and she got loud, and just going off saying whatever I guess teenage boys say. And Ashton is just like, Chiron is just like, his demeanor is just, he's just kind of unsure about Kevin. Like, you look at him and he's just wondering, you're trying to figure out what's going on internally. Like, he's kind of like, just kind of, it seems like he's a little bit uncomfortable listening to it or hearing the details to that extent. And he's just kind of like listening, kind of nodding, not really caring that he was having sex with this girl, even though I think Kevin was really trying to be like, I'm a boy and I was having sex with this girl, blah blah whatever. And anyway, so whenever they dap, you know what dapping means?
Oh yeah.
Whenever they dap to part, Kevin's just like, oh, you good, Black? He calls him Black. And so he's like, you can keep a secret. I know you can keep a secret. And it just kind of implies, I think, that there's other secrets that they've kept that they haven't shown in the movie. And so I thought that was really interesting, just like, because when they do it, there's just kind of like a slight pause between them. And he's like, I know you can keep a secret.
Yeah.
And so it definitely implies that Chiron has kept several secrets between him and Kevin. We don't really know what those secrets are.
But it really just shows their relationship to each other, just how close they are. Yeah.
It shows how close they are, but also how, like, it kind of feels like the relationship is felt differently on both sides. Like, It seems like Chiron is kind of confused as to how Kevin may feel about it, because by Kevin talking like that, just like, I know you can keep a secret, and like looking in his eyes and kind of pausing, Chiron's unsure if Kevin could potentially in any universe feel the same way, and I don't know if he necessarily wants to find out at that point.
Yeah.
So we go to Chiron. He spends the night at Teresa's. After going home, his mother tells him he can't be there. At this point, we see Paula, his mom. She's pretty advanced in her addiction, and she just kind of kicks him out, and she's like, you can't be here tonight. And so he goes to Teresa. This is the second time, and also it will be the last time we see Teresa. And from this scene, we learn that Juan has died, and we learn this later on in that scene, but before in that scene, we see them eating at a dinner table, and his eyes are low as usual, because that's just Chiron. His eyes are just low. She's like, are you okay? She's like, I've seen okay, and you ain't it. And he's like, yeah, I'm good. And she's like, you pick your head up. It's all love and all pride in this house. And I just thought that was an amazing scene, because I love Janelle Monáe, and I believe that was her first like film that she had ever done, and then also that year she also did Hidden Figures, I believe. So she's
back to back.
Yeah, we love her.
I mean, I'm just reminding of how we missed out on the opportunity to hang out with her, but it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
We can just go back to the movie. It's fine.
Yeah. Okay, so that happens, and we learn that Juan has died. We don't know how, but one thing I love about it is they don't really dwell on it. And that's something Barry Jenkins has also talked about, is how, that's just kind of how life is. Like, people die and you have to move on. You're forced to move on. So just like these characters had to move on, we have to move on. And so they don't linger on Juan's death. We don't know how Juan died, but it's not important to the story that is being told right now. But at the same time, it's something that's so real. Like, people die and we just have to move on.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was a beautiful way to do that. And so the next day we cut to Chiron going home, and he runs into his mom. And this isn't the first, is it?
What?
I'm trying to think if it was the first time that in the movie where the camera is, there's like portrait shots. So people are staring in the camera and acting towards the camera. So that's
something that Barry Jenkins used in If Beale Street Could Talk as well. He loves a portrait shot.
Yeah, and I believe that was the first time they had done that ever, was that scene where she acted, and I believe he asked her, he's like, that was that. And also, fun fact, she was only there, I believe, for 2 or 3 days because she had some visa issues. So she and Naomi Harris is the only actor that's a constant in the film. So she's in all 3 chapters. And she got there her first day of shooting. She has to like film, and she's like at an advanced stage, crack addiction. Mm-hmm. And so he says, I think he told her that that was great, but can you do it like directly into the camera, which can be awkward for an actor, but she just did it, and it was wonderful.
And what's interesting about that is how the audio didn't sync up with her mouth. Like
they kind of like slowed it down.
It's kind of, her mouth isn't moving with the words, and it's kind of fragmented and kind of all like a little bit scattered, you know? So I thought that was a nice touch. Like, everything feels like a choice in this movie, and that was definitely a choice. The thing is, what makes this one of the best movies of the decade is every choice works, and everything feels purposeful in how they were going to execute their message or what they wanted to show at that time. So yeah, the portrait shot and then how it feels scattered is another choice that just really worked for me.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because the way I see that is that's how Chiron at the time saw his mother. Like, he was kind of like, I think, just kind of taken aback. Just like, I think that might have been the first time he saw his mother as this like other thing. Like, he had never just, I think it was, I don't want to say out of body experience, but just kind of the way that he decided to kind of slow it down and not sync up the audio with their lips. I think that was, like you said, it definitely was a conscious and careful decision, and I definitely think it allowed us to kind of see Chiron's perspective. That's what we were seeing. We were seeing his mother at her most advanced stage in her crack addiction, and for the first time ever, Chiron is seeing someone other than his mother. And it goes into her walking into the house. She asked him to unlock, but the house was unlocked. And I really like this scene because she asked for money, and he's just like, I don't have money, like, where would he get money? And she's like, I know you have money because I know Teresa gives you money. And he's just like so hurt, he's so, it just, he gives her, eventually she just starts like kind of touching him and just like, picking at him, and he eventually gives her like potentially all the money he had, and he's just like, here, man, like, he just seemed so defeated. His voice like cracked in that moment. I was just like, yes, great acting, but sad. And the way his voice just like cracked in that instant was just like, it was kind of sad, and it was probably one of the, I might have cried in this scene. I think I might have cried in this scene, but it was definitely a sad scene, and so
I cried while researching, so it's fun. I was tearing up for sure.
All right, and then I believe the next scene is him going to school, and then on his way home he's bullied, and he just kind of takes another route home, and he's just kind of like on the train station. He falls asleep. You can tell he's been there before. Like, that's just kind of, like I said, a sense of I cannot say that word, familiarity with the surroundings and the setting, and he just kind of falls asleep. He seems almost at peace, and then he eventually goes to the beach. And one thing I want to say is that the beach is also something, I don't know if this is corny, but it seems like it's a character in the movie. The water, should I say, is a character?
The water is definitely a character.
It's a character.
It's not corny. It's just the truth.
I guess I just say it because I haven't necessarily heard them say that. Maybe I just haven't watched the right interviews, but the water is definitely a character in the movie. And we have the beach scene, which is essentially like a baptism, and then we have probably the most important, one of the more important scenes to advance the plot in chapter 2, which is the scene with Kevin and Sharon, which Kevin comes up to Sharon on the beach. This was probably the second time I would say that I've seen him at peace. The first time was the bathtub scene, and the second time is him at the beach.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. And we're coming to like the closing of chapter 2, and that peaceful scene was towards the closing of chapter 1. So
and then there's another one, and then we'll get to that.
And we'll get to that we'll get to that. But yeah, you can continue, because that's a good point that you bring up, that we're coming at another peaceful time, and one of the only peaceful times that he has in this stage of his life.
For sure. So we cut to that, and then like I said, Kevin gets there. Kevin's smoking weed. He hands Sharon the weed, and then they're just kind of talking, and then it kind of leads to flirting. Just kind of them like pushing each other, and then eventually leads into a kiss. And I think that kiss actually won Best Kiss at the MTV Movie Awards. 2017, one of those years.
Yeah.
And so that eventually led to the only sex scene in the show. Well, not the only. Well, yes, it's like, and it's not even a sex scene. It's like an implied sex scene. It's implied. It's heavily implied. There's nothing is shown, and I think this is such a beautiful way to show that. Like, they don't show. There's nothing being shown, but it's heavily implied what's going on. And so.
Oh yeah.
It's interesting because when you watch that kissing scene, they're joking around, and I believe they lean into kiss, but then Sharon kind of pulls away, just kind of unsure. He's like unsure. And honestly, I didn't say this earlier, but before, I think the night before, whenever he was at Teresa's, that night he dreamed of Kevin having sex with a girl, and he just kind of woke up like shook. And so that's just something that happened. Well, he pulls his head, he gently pulls his head away, and he's just kind of unsure of like what is happening, and then he kind of sees that Kevin is definitely sure of what is happening, and so it happens, and so they start kissing, and then it leads to the implied sex scene, which I think was really carefully constructed, and I really like the way it was constructed. Mm-hmm. And so something interesting that I heard on an interview that Barry Jenkins said was the actor Gerald Jerome, who plays Kevin, asked Barry before they shot the scene, because they were extremely nervous. It was their first sex scene. It was his first time directing a sex scene, and he's like, hey, has Sharon ever kissed a boy before? And so he's just like, no. And he's like, well, has Sharon ever kissed anyone before? And he's like, oh, like Sharon's never kissed anyone before. And he just kind of goes into basically the point of Kevin's role. I guess Kevin's role was just to kind of like guide Sharon and be his first experience or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely comes, Kevin definitely comes back around in the third chapter, obviously. But yeah.
Right. And so the next day happens, they go to school. Kevin, Sharon's kind of lighter. He's walking, he's at the cafeteria.
Yeah.
He's kind of lighter on his feet, just walking home. He walks to, not home, sorry. He's in the cafeteria, but he spots Kevin. He's about to walk there. Then he sees the bully, whose name we do not know, slide, in before him, and he talks to Kevin. And Kevin is challenged to fight some random kid, and of course the bully has to pick out the kid who he fights, and of course that bully had to pick out Sharon. And so this is a really important scene because it's definitely touching on toxic masculinity, which is something very prevalent in society, and the fact that Kevin just kind of wanted to be seen, wanted to fit in.
Yeah.
And he didn't, I don't want to say he didn't care, but in a way he didn't really care who he had to harm in the process to not be, I guess, equated or made fun of like Sharon was made fun of. And so this is somebody who he clearly, has something for. Like, you see it in his face, and the bully challenges Kevin. He challenges him to punch him, and the rules of the game is like, it's called knock down, stay down, and you have to punch him, and the person has to stay down, and they won't get punched again. Well, Sharon is just kind of testing Kevin at this point, and he's like, Kevin punches him. He feels bad. He does it again. And then at this point, he's like telling Sharon to stay down because he doesn't want to hit him again.
I was about to say, Kevin kind of
he doesn't want to hit him again. He's feeling bad about.
But he is being pressured into this.
Exactly. And he's also making that decision. And so Sharon knows this and is aware of this, and he's aware that Kevin could decide not to do this and make that decision not to do it, but yet going into caving into peer pressure, and so he just kind of standing up with his chest out, and they end up beating him. So they beat him pretty bad. We go in eventually he's like picked up by the school security guard. He's talking to the principal. That scene definitely made me cry whenever he's talking to the principal, and she's like, he's like, you don't even know. Like, she's like telling him like, hey, you have to tell me who did this. Like, we have to press charges. He's just like, you don't even know. So, we see Sharon go home, and he dumps his face in dunks his face in water, which is
it's a great transition too.
Exactly. And the next day he goes into school. He walks. We see him about to do something. We're not sure what he's about to do, but the camera is just kind of like following him. I don't know if it was kind of following him. The camera's just following him, and we're seeing him like just intensely walk to wherever he's going, and then we see he walks into the classroom with the bully, and he takes a chair and slams it on his head, and then continues beating him, and he gets arrested. And so this is the end of chapter 2, and we go into chapter 3, which is the conclusion of the movie. And we go into chapter 3, and in chapter 3 it's kind of the same thing. We talked about this earlier, but the scene of Paula appearing and screaming at Little, and this time we hear what she says, and she says, "Don't look at me." And we see an adult Black, which is what he's called now, which is an adult Chiron, played by Trevante Rhodes. We see him wake up, and it's clear that he's having these nightmares. Like, the trauma from his childhood has definitely followed him into his adulthood, and so he wakes up, and he's just like, sweating. And so we see him, water appears again, him dunking his head in ice cold water. He gets up.
Which is a nice callback to the chapter 2 where he dunks his head in water.
Exactly. And water.
Then back to the bathtub scene in chapter 1. Yeah, again, water. It's like washing away anything that you feel that needs to be washed away. Like, it's almost like just a quick rinse of whatever you're feeling. I mean, again, water as a character is not corny. It's definitely something that is reoccurring. And
I don't think it's corny. I just didn't know if it was corny coming out of my mouth.
Like you mentioned, Paula being the only constant throughout the film. Water is also a constant throughout the. We're seeing it in all 3 chapters, using it as, kind of like a refreshing or just needed rinse, or it's really playing a role here. And yeah, great. The chapter 3 dunking his head in water is a great callback to the chapter 2, and then also how water played a factor in chapter 1. So.
And I'm glad you said that. So we go into. So then now we see Black. He's driving, and we see him meet up with some guy, and we eventually learn that. We also see the crown in his car, which is the same crown that Juan had in his car. So we kind of learn that he's taking on that lifestyle as well, and he deals drugs now, and that's like his new life after all this happened. And he also looks completely different. I mean, they all look different, but his like, he's a new person at this point. And so we see this new persona that he's taken on. He's this new person. He talks more, and his personality is different. And then we eventually get to a scene where he's sleeping, and he had been getting calls from his mom before, and so this time he answers. His phone rings in like the middle of the night. He answers, and he thinks it's his mom, but it's actually Kevin on the other line. And it's so interesting because we see his whole demeanor just change, and he just like goes instantly back to that kid whose eyes are low and who doesn't talk, and he starts to stutter. And the actors are amazing. Andre Holland, who plays the adult Kevin, and Trevante Rhodes, who plays the adult Sharon, they're just amazing. All of them are amazing. So that was a really important scene. And Kevin just calls him. He invites him over, to talk or just to kind of catch up. And I don't think Kevin really thought that anything was going to happen. He just was kind of like, hey, like, I got your phone number. We're just thinking about you. So Sharon goes to visit his mom. This scene is also a really heartfelt scene, I would say. She's in I should probably say this before. So after that phone call, he goes to sleep, and he wakes up, and it's implied that he had like a dream, probably about Kevin, Anyway, so we see him in the next scene. I believe he went to visit his mother, and she's at a rehab facility. Yeah. And at this point she's at the end of her addiction. She's no longer addicted, or she's probably still addicted, but she's in recovery, and she's sober. And so they're just kind of talking, and they have like this heartfelt scene between them where she's, asking him not to sell drugs. Like, she's like, we didn't move all the way here for that. And he's just like, are you really going to give me advice right now? Like, he still has that hostility towards her for not being there when she should have. And so it goes on, and they have this, tearful exchange where it's kind of her reconciliation scene, where she just kind of apologizes for not being the mother that she feels that she should have been, and not having the love for him that she feels like she should have been, she should have had when he was a child. And so they're both crying. She's just like, I love you, I'm sorry. And we see him cry, and I thought that was a beautiful scene between Trevante Rhodes and Naomi Harris, and I just think they portrayed that beautifully. And I saw an interview where he said that it was really hard because they had to shoot that like 7 times, and it's just like 7 times crying back to back.
Yeah. I mean, capturing that same emotion 7 times is obviously tough for an actor. But yeah, chapter 3 does feel like a lot of closures happening for sure. Chiron, from his mother, and then to Kevin later at his house. And yeah, but we'll get to that point.
Yeah, so, glad you brought it up, because, so, next scene we see Chiron driving on interstate, and then he arrives at a diner, and then we learn that the diner is the diner that Kevin works at. So he walks in, Kevin doesn't recognize him, which is interesting, because, I guess we'll talk about that briefly after this, but he doesn't recognize him. Eventually they recognize each other, and when they recognize, it's another scene where Andre Holland and Trevante Rhodes are both staring in the, I don't want to say another scene, but they're both like it's like a portrait shot. They're staring into the camera, and it's the first time they've seen each other in like 10 plus years, and they're completely different people. From who they were when they were teenagers. And it's the first time they've seen each other since they were like 16. And it was just like, I really like that scene. And so they kind of talk, they greet each other. Whenever they greet each other, there's like a lingering that happens when they kind of dap up again. They're just like a lingering. And Kevin, he cooks a meal for Chiron, and then it leads to the booth scene, where there's in a booth, he cooks for Chiron, and then he's like talking to Chiron. He's like, yeah, man, like, you remember that girl Samantha? Like, I had a kid with her. And Chiron's just like, oh. He's just like, yeah. He's just like, and he doesn't say this, but the look, it's all about looks with them. So the look in his eyes definitely showed. It just kind of like his whole, like, he just kind of changed. Like, it reminded me of when Kevin was initially talking about the girl in chapter 2, where Chiron was just still like kind of unsure. He's just like, okay, why did you, why am I here if you're gonna just tell me about this woman you're with? And I don't know if Chiron thought, I don't think he had any expectations about it, but I don't think he expected that. So Kevin tells him, he's like, yeah, I have a kid now. And then Chiron's just like, oh, are y'all together? And he's just like, nah, we're not together. And then eventually somehow they start talking. Kevin asks, like, what about you? What are you doing? Who are you doing? And then Chiron's honest. He's like, I'm selling, he says I'm trapping, which means he's selling drugs. And Kevin's just like, dude, that's not you. Like, why are you doing that? Yeah. And Chiron kind of gets annoyed, just kind of like him telling him, like what to do. And also the fact that I think he's also just kind of annoyed because the reason that Chiron really is kind of doing that is because of Kevin. Like, he's in this position because of what happened with Kevin.
Because if he didn't feel the pressure to be masculine in that moment, it wouldn't have led Chiron to maybe hit the bully with the chair and then led him to press charges and go to jail, because going to jail is that turning point for Chiron.
He met someone in jail. Yeah. In juvenile, whatever he was. And that's how he basically started selling drugs. So it's really, I think that was kind of like the underlying thing there when Chiron was just like, you don't know me. Yeah. He's just like, and Kevin's like, I don't know you. And so, at this point, Chiron's kind of over it. He's just like, why am I here? And Kevin's like, I told you, this person played the song. It reminded me of you. So he gets up, he plays a song, which was Barbara Lewis, Hello Stranger by Barbara Lewis. And the way that scene was a beautiful scene. They're both just staring at each other, not saying anything, and the lyrics are just kind of speaking for them. The lyrics are saying what they're not saying in that scene, and you see them just kind of staring and looking at each other in the eye. And then eventually, this is my favorite scene probably in the movie. Just you see Kevin go sit down in front of Chiron, and then Chiron is looking down, and he's clearly thinking, and then he looks up, and that's when it cuts. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I love this movie.
Is that, I mean, I'm thinking about how we talked about it in part one, and this is the reason why I'm glad we're kind of running down all this, because you can start to make connections from bottom up or whatever you want to do from the outline. But that looking down, you mentioned in part one where, Chiron's looking down a lot, and then he finally picks his head up. This time when he picks his head up, it's more of like it's nice. It's nice. It's wow. It's really, as you mentioned, chilling. It's a lot of visual communication happening with this film, and yeah, I was just thinking about how in part one he's kind of always looking down, and then this is kind of the one part in, or maybe the second part in chapter 3 where he's looking down, and then it gives you that feeling when he looks up. It's really nice. So yeah, I'm just kind of thinking about maybe some of the connections there. But yeah, then there's the car ride to Kevin's house and everything. So
we have the car ride scene, and Barry Jenkins always says that that's his like favorite scene because aesthetically it's just like beautiful. We have two black men, specifically like Trevante, just him like the way he glistens in like the moonlight and this like sepia like color. Mm-hmm. Or like filter looking thing, not filter, but just like the color tones, I guess, and the way he just like glistens in the moonlight, like
moonlight.
Yeah. All right, so we have this car scene, and this is probably like my second favorite scene in the movie because I just love this like exchange between them where Kevin asks Chiron, well, first he's just like, yo, Chiron, you just came, because remember, well, I didn't say that before, but Chiron had moved to Georgia, and he's like, you just came from Georgia, like the day after I like called you and said you should come sometime, but not like the next day.
Yeah.
And he's like, you were just on one and just hit the highway. And Chiron's like, yeah. And he's looking like, was I not supposed to do that? Like, was that wrong?
I thought
and
we would say.
He's like, dude, I just want to, Yeah. And so he's just kind of like, he's like, and so he's like, okay, well, Kevin's just kind of like, I don't want to say amused by it, but he's just kind of like, oh, okay, like, and so
you feel the way about me?
Oh yeah. And so he's just like, oh, so where you staying tonight? And this part, Chiron, he just like, and he does what Chiron does, which is not say anything ever. And he just turns up the music, which is all the answer I guess Kevin needed. And I just love that like little smirk that he just kind of had, like Kevin, like the like he just kind of puts his head to the side and he just kind of like that little smirk.
Yeah.
And so we arrive at Kevin's apartment. And we look off in the distance and we hear those. Chiron looks at the the ocean, which makes another appearance. Just kind of a quick appearance right there, and he just kind of looks at it and I think he just kind of takes in, maybe it might be the same like ocean where important life events have happened, from that baptism scene to the scene with him and Kevin as teenagers. And so he just kind of takes it in, and they go inside and we see them interacting. We see like Kevin just boiling tea, and they kind of just talk about like their life since all that stuff happened. And Kevin's just saying like, he's kind of content where he is in his life right now. Like, he felt that he never really lived his own life. He kind of just lived a life that people thought he was supposed to live, and that I guess he thought he was supposed to live. And so he just kind of talks about how like now as like a father and as an employed person, I say employed person, but just he has a job after I think he went to jail, and he was after he got off parole. He's just like, yeah, he's like, I'm not making much money, but I'm happy and I'm content.
Yeah.
As in compared to Chiron, who I don't want to say is just making that like journey, but that's kind of like the theme of the movie is just like who is Chiron. And so we get to that point where Kevin is asking him like, I wasn't expecting this when I called you, when you pulled up, I was not expecting this. And he's just like, who is you, Chiron? And that's probably like the climax of the movie, just like him asking that question because
that's something like Chiron's been asking himself
the entire movie.
Yeah.
And so I would say the introduction to that was or like the foreshadowing of that was that scene when we go all the way back to chapter 1 where Juan was with Little, and he tells him, don't let nobody decide for you who you are. You decide who you are. And so we address that again at the end of chapter 3 where Kevin's just like, who is you, Chiron? And Chiron's kind of like, he's just kind of like, kind of taken aback, just kind of like, I'm me, like I'm not trying to be nobody else. But in reality, I don't think he knows who he is. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I just, that's what I was thinking. Like, when Kevin does ask Chiron who he is, he's still a little confused, I guess. Like, he's like, I thought I'm who I'm supposed to be, but, this isn't the life that I don't think Chiron mapped for himself, anyone else mapped out for him, for himself. It's just Moonlight. I mean, it takes you. Chapter 3 is just not where you would have thought, I guess, Chiron Little would have been. So it just a lot of things build up to get to this place. It shows that movie shows how all of these little moments in your life can lead you to certain paths, and that's where Chiron's still like, I thought I was who I was supposed to be.
Exactly.
So that's the only thing I have to.
And then just kind of like I said before, just when you think about their relationship and how it led to that point where Kevin literally had to do something so vile, that led to them not seeing each other for over 10 plus years.
Yeah.
And so, without that happening, they would have never had this like moment of reconnection. And just, I don't even think they probably would have been mentally where they are now. No telling where they could have been if that hadn't happened. And there's always those complexities when it comes to life because life is not linear.
No.
So.
Definitely you can see that in this movie. It's not linear.
It's definitely not. And so we get to the heartfelt scene, which is also a sad scene. This scene, every time I watch it, it literally gives me goosebumps. Just like Trevante Rhodes. Trevante. Amazing actor, He was in Burma. With Sandra Bullock. Anyway, so...
I missed that. It's fine.
But this scene, he says... and this is like a long time after Kevin's like, who you doing? So we get to this part. It all leads up to this scene right here. And Chiron's like, you the only man that's ever touched me. And he's like, you the only man I've ever been with. He's like, nobody's really touched me since. And the way he says it, and I would say the way he delivers it, just like after moments of hesitation and his eyes being low as usual, and then him looking up, it seemed like he took everything in him to say that. It seemed like he built up so much, like, just like, I don't know what it was, like courage, or just, it took everything in him just to say, you, the only person who I've ever felt this way about, who I've ever been with, intimately like that. And so it really kind of goes into like how he's now an adult, and he's, up until then he lived his adult life just kind of like sexually immature in a way. And Barry Jenkins talked about this, about how just, he after what happened with Kevin, he kind of just developed a sense of asexuality where he just didn't feel like he was capable of love because everyone who's loved him has hurt him. Mm-hmm. And people who he has loved, he's also lost. So like his mother, who's supposed to be the ultimate person who loves you, nurtures you, takes care of you, didn't do that as he grew up. And then you have this one person who he thought that he could trust and he could love, betray him. And he just not knowing how to really express those emotions. And so you can tell, like, up until that point, he just kind of went through this sense of like asexuality, not really feeling that he was worthy of love. And so there's just so much, and the thing is like none of this stuff is said. There's just so much. These scenes are just so loaded. Like there's just so much things that you can unpack in all of them.
And I was about to say, there's so much to unpack with just one line of "You're the only man that's ever touched me." Like, there's so much to unpack there that I can't even get to. I just know it's very impactful. It's definitely the culmination of this exploring Chiron. Like it feels like, is this the first time Chiron's maybe embraced his sexuality, or even like acknowledging it in a way that he's never acknowledged it before. I wouldn't say maybe embracing it, but I think acknowledging it in that way, like verbally. I don't think he's ever. I don't think he's done that. So until this point, that's. I don't know. There's a lot to say. I just know that when he said that, I was a mess. So that's
it gives me goosebumps every time I watch it. It's definitely like top 3 scenes. Top 3 scenes of the movie. Just and it's wild because all my favorite scenes are in the last. I have a lot. They're all favorite. Okay, this whole movie is my favorite scene.
This whole movie is a scene. There you go.
Yeah, and so like I said, the actors like Andre Holland and then Trevante Rhodes, the way he delivered that line was just so beautiful, and just perfect. And so we eventually it cuts to, after he says that, Kevin just kind of looks at him like, like just, I don't know. I don't even know. He was just kind of like surprised in a way, but just also kind of like, I don't know what that look was. It kind of seemed like, I kind of don't know how to unpack that look. Okay, that look was just kind of, it was like a smirk in a way, just kind of like, I don't know. I guess maybe like, okay, well, maybe you are here for the reasons I want you to be here. Mm-hmm. And it's not like just one thing, but it's so many other things, right? And so all the things that have happened between them two have just led them to that moment right there. And I think Kevin was just kind of satisfied. It's like, okay, you're here for the reasons I want you to be here. And you've clearly just stated it. And so the next scene cuts to them embracing, similarly to how they embraced like on the beach in chapter 2. And I would say that's like the 3rd time you see Chiron just at peace, and you really look at Travante's face, and he's just like you really like when you really like just study his face, just like the level of peace he seems to be at is just so like beautiful and masterful. And I just really am appreciative of all the actors in this movie, especially every single Chiron, because the way this movie was done wasn't not only the way the movie was done was beautiful, but also the acting. And so the very last scene cuts to Little, and he's standing in front of the beach, and this is also my header on Twitter, but he turns around and he looks back. And I really like the way Andre Holland, in an interview that he did, I really like the way he kind of refers the way he talks about it, and he just says that that's like his favorite scene, because it seems like, when we cut back to Little, it's just like, okay, well, maybe things will be all right. Like everything's messed up in my world right now, but just him looking back, it kind of gives us hope, because the movie doesn't end. This is not a movie with big plot changes, or just, it's not a like,
this is a big plot twist.
It's not like a
turn.
Exactly. There's not like a lot of big plot twists or anything. The movie just ends. And what's so beautiful about that is just like, that's how it should end. Like, it was a perfect ending, I would say, to that movie, and to that, it wasn't even a storyline, I would say, but just, it was a storyline, but you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, there's so much you could unpack from that. Like, it could have been their last time ever, together, but it could have also been the beginning of a possible future for them too, because not many people get second chances. Mm-hmm. And so what I really love about this is like you said, all these things have led up to them being together in this moment, and whether or not they choose to move forward with a relationship or just in life, whatever it may be, I think they needed that moment. They needed this thing to happen. They needed this sense of like reconciliation, but also just acknowledgement of their feelings for one another, because it was never really clear. As children, they were just kind of children, and then when they were teenagers, it was more so clear, but like less after he like fought him. So I think they really just needed this because they were both in a different place in their lives. Kevin was definitely in a more, I would say, accepting place in his life, and I think Chiron eventually got to that point in this scene. Just he kind of got a sense of him. I don't want to say himself back, but just his identity, maybe a part of his identity that he didn't know, or he maybe has not. He's been hesitant to really, not, I don't want to say embrace, but just kind of acknowledge. And when I say identity, I don't mean label. I just mean just something, a part of him that he was missing, and that I think was regained or was gained in this scene.
Yeah, and that's what I was kind of thinking about. This movie, it almost tackles the thought of everyone trying to put you in a box, everyone trying to define you, everyone trying to characterize you or map out your life. Like, you either end up dead or in jail. Like, that kind of thought process. Like, they're always trying to put someone in a box. But that last scene, these last couple scenes, definitely feels like we can be more, or like the paths that we've taken and that have led our lives to this. It's more than that. It's more than what people have tried to put us in, like the box that people try to put us in. It's more than that. So, there's the whole movie is just incredibly done, and especially with the themes that it tackles. And I am looking at the outline a little bit. And
yeah, me too.
I love that. You definitely have 3 themes written down that. With Kevin and his toxic masculinity, or just masculinity in general, that's being discussed in this film. We definitely see that, as we mentioned, with the scene where he beats up Chiron because of the pressure felt by his peers. So I didn't know if you wanted to speak any more on the masculinity theme.
Yeah, so there's a million themes in this movie, I would say. So I kind of only wrote down like a couple.
Yeah.
Like just kind of things that the movie touched on, and it touched on toxic masculinity. And I don't think it was only seen within Kevin. It was also seen obviously with the bullies, and it was seen kind of internalized within Chiron, and just in general. I think it's something that we all hold. It's not something specific to men, I don't think. Are just like the men who only show it to the extreme. Toxic masculinity, I believe, just is something that's internalized in all of us. And so just even the fact that Chiron, I don't want to say Chiron, but we see it with Kevin when he is challenged to fight somebody, and him just trying to prove to these bullies, just trying to stay on their like good side and trying to be a part of this like group of people. He's willing to fight the only person who he knows. I believe Kevin knew that Chiron really trusted him, and he was probably one of the only people that Chiron trusted. And so the fact that he did that, it was just like, it definitely shows just how strongly it is, but also how impressionable teenagers are.
Yeah.
Because teenagers will give in to peer pressure because society tells us that, as boys, you can't be weak. You have to be able to do this and, react to your emotions in violent ways and physical ways, act out in those ways. So whether it be like just trying to fit in and just stay in those circles. So he just he made that conscious decision, like I said, knowing that, I believe he knew that Chiron, that he was probably the only person that Chiron trusted at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so I also want to talk about just kind of really beautiful, like the beautiful way that Barry Jenkins really depicted the dimensionality of all these characters. This movie, and this is just kind of going into why this movie is so important, because this is the only movie I would say that I've seen that has really carefully constructed Black people and Black queer people, for that matter, into like these three-dimensional characters. Whereas you look at, for example, Juan, who's like the neighborhood drug dealer, who's like the neighborhood drug dealer. And a lot of times when we see black men who are drug dealers on movies or on TV, they're just bad guys. How we're trained to see them. That's what they're supposed to be, because doing drugs or dealing drugs is a bad thing. And so you see Juan, but he's given this role of father figure slash mentor slash drug dealer slash just all around good person, because we kind of tug with that. And they even bring it up whenever it's a scene between him and Paula, and Paula's like, okay, so you gonna raise my son now?
Yeah.
So you see that conflict, and it's even internal within Juan, because we see it in that scene, and we also see it when Little asks him, like, my mother does drugs, just kind of putting the two together, like, she clearly gets it from you. And so, just the way it's carefully constructed by Barry Jenkins is part of the reasons why I love this movie so much, and part of the reasons why it's such an important movie. And then on top of that, you also see these black men, and we talk about gay men, but I'm going to use the word queer right now as just kind of an umbrella term, just to me, not straight. And I say that because gay in this particular movie is such a sexuality is just in reality, I would say, in life, sexuality is just a spectrum. So you can't really, I mean, yes, you can say it's important for black gay men, but then you see people like Kevin, and he's not really gay. He's kind of just queer, bisexual, whatever label you want to use. And so just the way he carefully constructed those characters, you have... And that's the beautiful part about it, is like it's about Sharon discovering himself, and within himself is his sexuality. It's not about him discovering his sexuality, which I love about this movie. So it's not solely about him trying to find the labels, trying to figure out if he likes men or if he likes women, which I feel like a lot of movies about gay people do. They make it about the struggle of being gay, and which is a real thing, but I think we've heard all those stories and we've seen all those narratives, and so, but we've never seen it with black queer people, but also just his sexuality not centering the movie, but in a way still centering the movie.
Yeah,
it centers his identity, and in his identity is his sexuality. And so you think about the term intersectionality, whereas he's, as a black queer poor man with a mother who's addicted to crack, he's experiencing all these things at once, just as a marginalized person with all these marginalized identities. And so he's not picking one. He's not like, well, today I'm gonna get bullied because I'm gay, and tomorrow I'm gonna get bullied because I'm poor. Like, he literally got bullied in the same scene for being poor and gay. And so that's when you kind of bring that word, intersectionality, and you really start to think about it, because Barry Jenkins definitely carefully constructed that movie and the intersectionalities within that movie, within this movie.
And there's one word on your outline that I want to bring up, is nuance, and it's a word we use a lot, right? Nuance, yes. I think in the past 8 months while we've been gone, we've used nuance a million times.
Yes, because it's so relevant.
But I mean, that's another thing that it could deal with, the dimensionality, is the nuance, Barry Jenkins gives to the characters, the humanity. It's not just the label that's been placed upon them. It's everything else that is shown. They've given them a lot of like nuance, and as you mentioned, it's not just about the exploration of Chiron's sexuality. It's about a lot of other things, and it's not solely focused on it. And that's thanks to Barry Jenkins and the nuance that he gives all the characters. So.
And you said an important word, humanity, and that is probably the main point, or the main thing about this movie. It's just that all these characters have their humanity. All these main characters, Chiron, his mother, Juan, they have their humanity. And that's something I think that when you see crack addicted black people, black women on movies, they're not really given that to that extent. And then same thing with gay people, same thing just with black people being depicted in other things. And I'm not saying there's no movie or TV show dealing with black people that doesn't depict black people with with any type of dimensionality. I'm just saying that that's probably the most important thing about this movie, because this movie, we know it went on to win the 2017 Oscar Academy Award for Best Picture. And I mean, I don't know many other winners, but just seeing a movie like that, an independent film that only cost what was like $1 million $1.5 million to make, which is not a lot of money in the movie world. You see these movies that become such big phenomenons and, a big deal in the film world. And a lot of times you don't see movies with depicting black people like this, or movies with an only black cast with no white people in it, that give black people so much humanity and nuance and dimensionality, right?
Yeah, we laugh every time we say the word nuance. Yeah. It's okay.
Sorry. So this is my favorite movie. So I'm gonna end that like every sentence, and so
yeah.
And just kind of go in the music score. It was a beautiful music score, so beautiful that I bought it on vinyl because it definitely was a beautiful music score by Nicholas Britell, which I believe Barry Jenkins also worked with for If Beale Street Could Talk. Yep. If you haven't heard the music score for that, please go check it out. Like that scene when he's like blowing smoke and doing that wood carving, like.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Just like the cinematography, which was also done by James Laxton. Shout out. Him and Barry Jenkins went to film school together.
And if I would have done, I always thought about like doing the best scenes I saw like in the year. Definitely that scene would have been there in one of the best scenes of 2018 in If Beale Street Could Talk. Even if it wasn't like one of the best movies of the year, that scene definitely stands out for sure. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that. Also, if you haven't seen Madeline's Madeline, the breakdown scene from the main character in that one, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to that one. Anyway, back to Moonlight.
Shout out. So yeah, that was a beautiful, beautifully composed scene. I feel like I'm not very equipped to talk about like, scores and stuff like that, but I did want to point out what I thought was interesting was the third chapter was probably the chapter you hear music the most. Like overall, the movie is pretty silent. You hear like Little's theme, I believe the movie starts off with a song, but it's kind of just quiet, and then you hear Little's theme the first time, I believe, when Juan is taking Little to get food in the like first chapter, and it's such a beautifully like crafted. And one thing that I thought was interesting that Barry Jenkins, I've heard him say in interviews, is that the movie can exist without, or the music. Wait, let me look at the quote.
We got the quote.
Let's see.
Okay.
Barry Jenkins says that the film can exist without the music, but the music cannot exist without the film. So, what do you think about that?
Okay, so the film can exist without the music. I feel like I'm breaking this whole down, but the music doesn't exist without the film. I feel like I'm not equipped as well to break down score and everything like that.
We're not geniuses.
The only thing I wanted to bring up in the musical score, conversation is that I did hear, I don't know if you heard this, that as the movie goes on, the score is pitched down.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, the score is pitched down to kind of give this like more, just like a darker tone and like everything like that as Sharon's life progresses. I don't know.
I'm glad you brought that up because in the third scene you hear chopped and screwed music, which is popular. I grew up listening to knowing of chopped and screwed music because it's a popular music style in like Houston and Texas.
Yeah.
But it's also like popular apparently in Miami. And so Barry Jenkins said that like the composer Nicholas Britell literally like took the score and like chopped and screwed it, and I just thought that was so interesting. I think that's so like that's like
there's an exclusive vinyl out there somewhere that we need to get our hands on. But
it's like just like a chopped and screwed, like it's not the score, but it's like the music that is in the movie.
So Barry Jenkins, if you're listening to this, if you want to send over a copy or something,
it's like Chop Not Slop. I think it's DJ Screw and the Chop Stars or somebody. I forgot who it is that did it. I have it on my playlist on SoundCloud, so check that out. Stream it. So yeah, I wanted to just kind of touch on that. And also one thing I thought was really interesting when we talk about like allyship and talk about allies, I'm one person. My view on like allyship is, I don't want to say complex, but just for me, I'm just like, being an ally is just kind of the bare minimum. And because to me, what it means is just that you respect people in marginalized groups. You know, it sucks that they are in this like oppressed place and are oppressed by the made the majority, but for me, being an ally is just kind of the bare minimum. But when you kind of break down what Barry Jenkins did, he talks a lot about being an active ally. And I don't think he's necessarily talking about it in a way to like pat his back or give himself a cookie.
Also, you don't have to make a film to be an active ally.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. Like it just means like speaking up in the ways you know how. And I think the language he speaks in is art. He's an artist. He knew how to do this through a film. And I don't think he was thinking. And I've heard him talk about this on interviews where he says he wasn't thinking about like being woke. He wasn't trying to he wasn't trying to produce or create this groundbreaking like gay movie as a straight person. He was just trying to make a movie, like as he says, for like a movie that spoke to him, and it was literally about him and Terrell. He said that's all the movie's about. Like,
I was about to say it brings it back to the experiences you talked about earlier.
Right. Yeah. And it's about them too. It's about no one else but them too. And the fact that so many audiences across the world connect with it is just such an amazing thing. And so talking about allyship, like I said, it becomes complex, or I guess my view on it kind of becomes a little bit complex because I want to give him his cookies. I want to give him not his cookies, but his his accolades. I respect him so much for creating this movie, but I don't want to talk about it as if his sole reason for creating this movie was to be an ally or to be like he wasn't trying to center himself when he created this movie, which is why I respect him so much. Like he will always give thanks and praise to Terrell Alvin McCraney for being vulnerable enough to put his experiences into a written form so that Barry Jenkins can go on to recreate. And Barry Jenkins even he put his own touch on it, and I will always give him his flowers for that. I will always respect him for that, and I like how he kind of talks about being an active ally and not necessarily being a passive ally. Like people will say, I support gay people, and that's it, But they'll say it in conversation. They won't like tweet it. They won't like share important information. They won't actually give their opinion about terrible things that are happening to people in the LGBTQIA plus community, or they're not actually doing anything about it. They're just kind of like, well, that's them, it's not me. And that kind of just complacency is just not cool. So yeah. So I thought that was an interesting thing that he does, like I said, by just not centering himself in the conversation. When it does come up about allyship, he doesn't really center himself. He just says like, I see myself as an active ally, and that's how he knows how to act, and I really appreciate him for that.
And that was one of the really interesting things that you brought up to me when we were, prepping the episode and things like that, is I saw, active allyship. That's just something that's come along with this movie, right. So I really like this point of active allyship that Barry Jenkins talks about. So, yeah.
And so, just kind of to add on to the importance of the film, which we've already discussed really, but I just kind of wanted to make a quick point, just we talked about the dimensionality, but also just depicting two black gay cis men, which is something you don't. And if you don't know what cis means, cisgender, which means you identify the way you were assigned at birth. And so that's just something you don't see in movies. You don't see that in movies. Like, and then a movie that won,
at the scale that
won an Oscar. Yeah. You don't see black, gay, queer men like loving each other and being vulnerable and being sensitive and being affectionate.
It's really like intimate.
It's very intimate. That's why I love this. It's very intimate, and it's just something you do not see on your screens. It's something we don't see. It's something that's still, even in the, I would say, black community, as a black person, like it's still something that's kind of taboo. Just men being vulnerable and being intimate around each other. Even, I would say, to an extent, black gay men, just like in public. And it's not their fault. It's society's fault, right? Society is created to where you're uncomfortable to be affectionate around your partner, or to be affectionate, because it's such a common thing to see two women hug each other. They may even go to the bathroom with each other. I mean, that's like a safety thing, but just like two women be very affectionate around each other, even if they are friends, but you don't see men doing that. And so for it to be for them to show that, and to show these like two black queer men, you know, being affectionate with each other, for Barry Jenkins to show that, I just it makes it such an important film. And yeah, so
Yeah.
and also I wanted to point out that a lot of times when we do see like black people engage in queer relationships on television or on TV, a lot of times it's interracial relationships, and I'm not trying to be an interracial relationship hater. I'm just saying we don't see that representation of two black people, you know, loving each other and you know, being affectionate, being vulnerable with each other, like two black queer people. Like we see it all the time when it comes to like straight people. We see it all the time when it comes to you know, it almost seems as though like blackness cannot exist in the mainstream world without whiteness. We cannot exist without a white person next to us, you know? So the way that we can show that, oh yes, black queer people do exist, is by having them with a white queer person. And I think queer stories are important, and there are interracial queer relationships, but we can also show that, yes, there are also black queer relationships that need to be shown on TV. And so it just kind of brings me to the fact that all of this is just like bigger, you know what I'm saying? Just bigger than you and me. Like this movie is such a trailblazing movie, and it makes you just want more. You know, I don't think after this movie was made, it was made in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
It came out in 2016, right? And we haven't really seen any other movies depicting black queer men or black queer characters that way, and I would say that carefully. At least I haven't seen it, and it just, you know, that's Moonlight is not where we stop. Like I want to get to the point where we can see black people, black queer people in their as humans, in their full humanity, as, you know, stories that are being told, like to the point where, you know, like when we watch regular movies, or not regular movies, but we watch movies with white characters and white straight cishet, you know, characters in relationships, you know, they have sex scenes, they have argument scenes, they're arguing, they have laughter, they have so many things happening, they have their dimensionality, they have that nuance, and there's so many things that they have their humanity. So I want to see, you know, black queer people engaging in this. And then it kind of brings me to just things that have happened since. And when I think about that, I think about the show Pose, which kind of is probably, I would say, the only thing maybe since that's kind of been in really like popular culture that's really shown the humanity of black folk like that. Like just where we're, and black queer people at that, black queer and trans folks. And it's such an important show on TV. If you don't know what Pose is, it's a show on FX that kind of shows the lives of trans people of color, specifically like trans women of color, trans black women, and other queer and gay folks in the ball scene in the late 1980s and early 90s. It's a really important show. If you haven't watched it, you should definitely watch it. It's also it's probably one of the only things I've seen for me personally that I've seen since Moonlight that kind of shows queer people in such a three-dimensional, you know, way, where they have sex scenes, they have fighting scenes, they're laughing, they're happy, they're sad, they're humans, because we're all humans that experience these things. But, you know, so that's kind of what I had to say about that. But just when you think about Moonlight, you know, I mention it to people all the time because, like as I've said, it's my favorite movie, and I will continue watching it.
And I think you said it's the best movie ever made.
Yeah, well, for me it is. Yeah. I'm not. I mean, look, I haven't seen every single movie. I'm gonna be honest, you know, but it definitely is the best movie ever made, in my opinion. But I when I ask people, and Moonlight, we know it's win. We know what happened. We don't have to discuss the specifics.
It's fine. I don't even want to get into
of that
it.
Oscar win, but it happened, and it was deserved. But when I talk to people and I say, hey, have you seen Moonlight? Or I'm gonna go watch Moonlight. Or, dang, I just ordered my Moonlight poster. I can't wait to hang it up.
Right.
Or I'm like, oh dang, I just got my. Why am I saying dang? I'm like, yay! I just got my my score, my on vinyl, the Moonlight movie score, and they're like, what's Moonlight?
What's Moonlight?
I'm like, what's Moonlight? What's Moonlight? You don't know what Moonlight is? Like, my mom hasn't seen it. I'm like, what are y'all doing with your life? And I just kind of want to quickly talk about, like, why haven't people seen this movie?
That's what I wanted. That's what I want to talk about as well, because it's when you think this is tough, because I want everyone to see this movie.
Yes.
And people,
hopefully you didn't spoil it.
I do have to like realize that not everyone's maybe as into movies as I am or anything like that. But like people are going to see Fast and Furious movies, like, which while I do enjoy, it's just like people are going to see movies, but people aren't going to see this movie, or people aren't putting this movie on. It's literally on Netflix, but it's not on the popular tab on Netflix or anything like that. And that's what bothers me. It's like it has all this, it has hype behind it, and word of mouth behind it. Just why aren't people seeing it?
Where are the advertisements? Netflix. Well, you know what?
Well, first off, Netflix likes to keep the ball rolling and just want to advertise what they have new that week or whatever. But even though Netflix, Disney Plus is coming.
Step your game up.
They're on your tail, but it bothers me. Because I can't expect everyone to watch this movie, but just for the people that are thinking, oh, I've always kind of wanted to watch that movie, just put it on. Just put it on. If you think like, oh, it's too sad or it's too dramatic, it's really not. Like, it's really doesn't.
I'm glad you said that.
It's really not heavy on you, but it's impactful. That's what I think of it. Like, because sometimes I'll go into movies and be like, it might be too sad or it might be too this, but if you just put it on, you'll realize it's not that sad. It's just real.
Yep. I'm glad you said that. I'm so glad you said that.
Like, I don't know. It's just really impactful for me.
I'm so glad you said it, because you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of when like a movie depicting like racism or like something like terrible that happened to like black people or other people of color comes out. And I talked to somebody or a person and they're like, oh no, I haven't seen it. It's like too sad. And when I say a person, I mean specifically a white person, and I'm just like, yeah, but it like happens.
Yeah,
you don't have to experience it. It's something like I could literally like go outside and experience that same thing that happened in that movie, like right now, depending on what happened in that movie. Maybe not slavery, but just it's like, yeah, but it's a reality, that black people have to go through, and we have to live with, So whenever people of like a certain, like maybe just like a certain place of privilege just kind of are like, yeah, I can't see it, I can't watch it because it's just so sad. And it's just like, well, people have to live this every day, and so that's why I'm always just kind of like, when people say stuff like that. So I think about Moonlight, and I think about like straight people could be like, oh, it's just so sad, and it's like, imagine being a queer person who may relate to it on such a deeper level than you could ever even like think to, you're like, yeah, man, I was missing a part of my identity, but I found out I like playing the banjo, and it's like, okay, well, it's still valid, it's still a part of your identity, but some queer person could be going through the exact same thing and relate to it on such a deeper level, and so when they watch this, it feels so much differently than it feels for you, and deep and a little bit deeper. And I don't want to invalidate anybody's personal connections to the movie, but at the same time, it's you have to understand that it's coming from a place of privilege of you to be able to say, I can't watch this because it's too sad, unless it's happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
So
go watch Moonlight.
Go watch Moonlight. And look,
it's on Netflix. What the heck?
Yeah, it is on Netflix. If you have Netflix, or if you have somebody's account like I do, not saying y'all should do that. We're not promoting it, but I mean, who cares, right? Because I don't.
Just go watch it.
It's fine. Look, find it, watch it, Stan, Barry Jenkins,
and then re-listen to this podcast and stand along,
and then watch it 7 more times, and then watch it
And make a podcast about it.
Make a podcast about it, and then stan everybody involved in this movie. And so, for the last, segment, we have a new, final segment.
Yeah.
We don't have a name for it yet, but it's just a segment where we're just kind of I'm gonna kind of, since the podcast is about Moonlight, I recently read a book. Well, do you want to go first, actually? I think you should go first.
Yours might be a better way to end the podcast.
Oh, you don't want to?
No, because I do have an end segment. So, your idea of the end segment is...
Yeah.
It's maybe something you kind of content that you've checked out,
right,
or anything like that.
Just like a book,
book,
music,
song, film. So
anything that's resonated with you, just what is it? Has anything?
So I'm thinking about the last new content I consumed, and that was Ma. So I didn't know Ma would make it into this conversation.
Oh my god.
Okay, but we're going to the end segment, and we want to end on something light, or I'm gonna
end on something dark.
But that's fine. I'll just bring this up because this is the last piece of new content I've consumed. So I keep a list of all the new movies I've watched this year, movies I've never seen before. So on that list, I'm not counting any movies I've already seen that I happen to watch this year. Anytime I rewatch a movie, I don't count it. So just strictly movies I've never seen before, I'm watching for the first time, and that's it. So I've seen 126 is where I'm at on the list.
God damn.
Which is a lot.
That's almost as many times as I've seen Moonlight.
So Ma was the last one on that list, and it's been about 5 days since I've watched a new movie, so I think Ma's deterring me from other new movies.
It's ruined you. You can't see anymore.
That's kind of where I'm at. I'm looking for the next new
You're scared
movie.
It's gonna be like Ma.
Yeah,
damn Ma.
I'm a little scared, but let me just say, in terms of music, YB and Corday's album is growing on me a little bit, especially the song "Way Back Home" with Ty Dolla $ign. I totally recommend it. I can picture "Way Back Home" by YB and Corday and Ty Dolla $ign to make it at the end of the whatever top list that we do. If I forget it, then you know what, I'm flawed. Okay, so yeah, I think. In terms of a positive thing, YB and Corday's album is kind of growing on me a little bit more. It's called Lost Boy, if you want to check it out or anything like that.
Anderson .Paak's in it.
Yeah, Anderson .Paak's in it. We stand. So, yeah, go check that out. So,
all right.
That's where I'm at.
Well, I'm glad that's resonated with you. I recently... I failed to mention that, but recently this year, I really got into reading. I've read before. I can read. Interesting, right? So I just
I am literate.
But I think I just haven't really got into books. Even when I was in middle school, everybody kind of reads Harry Potter and stuff like that, in middle school, but I didn't. So I was just never really one of those people that really got into reading. But recently, this year, it just was one of those things that I really wanted to kind of I don't say force myself to do, but encourage myself to do it. I really wanted to learn more, and the only way I really knew I could learn more was by reading things and literature that I wanted to read. And so, after a couple books, I really I picked up a book. I picked up James Baldwin's Giovanni's Room, and let me tell you, I loved that book. I don't know if it's my favorite book ever yet because I haven't read that many books, but it's a really good book. It's James Baldwin is also just a genius, and Barry Jenkins also really loves James Baldwin. I'm pretty sure his favorite James Baldwin book is Giovanni's Room, and he adapted a James Baldwin book, If Beale Street Could Talk. Y'all should check that out too because it's also amazing and beautiful. But I really love that book. I read it. I picked it up and I read it in one day, and it's a very quick book. You can read it in one day. And I read it before my shift at work, and I was just this is amazing. This is amazing. I just could not put it down. And so I decided to pull a quote from it that really spoke out, that really kind of resonated with me, and I thought was a really powerful quote. in the novel. And so just to kind of give you a quick background, the book is basically centering around this guy named David who is kind of denying who he is, like his sexuality and just his feelings for this man named Giovanni. And all the times, they spend time together, and they at one point kind of live together, and they're in this sexual intimate relationship, but David just kind of refuses to like acknowledge that this is what it is. It is a relationship. We are together. We are in love, and it's such a beautiful, beautiful book because I believe I haven't read any other James Baldwin. I am gonna read. I plan on reading all of his like works, but I'm just kind of reading, like I read reviews afterwards, and it just kind of talked about how, it was definitely a step in a different direction from what he had normally done, which was write about Black people and write about Blackness. And in this book, these are just two French or European, like, white men, and it was just kind of a step from, I don't know. I just thought that was an interesting like fact, an interesting tidbit. So it's just like these two men, and it's I guess there's like no race element because it's only focusing on the love, and it's interesting because whenever there are Black people or other people of color, I think the race element, because races exists, I think the race element just kind of becomes like a political statement in a way, even though sexuality is also kind of like a political statement. I think he didn't really want to distract from that love element in the book, so and like I don't know, like I'm not a James Baldwin like expert, but it just kind of felt like that's what was happening. Like the book is just purely about love and lack thereof, or like the resisting of it. So the quote I pulled is then I, alone and relieved to be alone, perhaps went to a movie, walked, or returned home and read, or sat in a park and read, or sat in a cafe terrace, or talked to the people, or wrote letters. I wrote to Hella, telling her nothing, or I wrote to my father asking for money, and no matter what I was doing, another me sat in my belly, absolutely cold with terror over the question in my life. And so that last sentence right there, he says, absolutely cold with terror over the question in my life, which is kind of the central point of the book. It's just the question in his life. I don't know if it's a specific question, but it's just like, I can't even like say what that question is, but I feel it, like just this is just such an amazing like novel. Like I feel it, and it just kind of reminded me of how the question, like the Moonlight, kind of revolved around a question as well, which was, who is you, Sharon? And it's pretty similar to what David is experiencing, like trying to figure out who he is, what his identity is, what is he doing with this woman essentially. Is he gonna marry her? Is he gonna stay with her, or is he gonna be with is he gonna continue his relationship with Giovanni, or why is he so hesitant? At this point, he's with Giovanni, but he still feels very distant. Like he wants to push away. He doesn't like the fact that he's feeling these feelings, and as soon as he feels those feelings, he like hates Giovanni. It's such a beautiful book. It's such a beautiful book. Just like, oh my goodness. I think I might read it again. No, I know I'm gonna read it again because it's just such a beautiful book. But yeah, I just kind of like when I read that, I just kind of connected the two. Just how Chiron, he's trying to figure out who he is, what part of that identity, what part of his identity is he missing, or what is he not accepting, what is he not understanding. And so it's the same thing with David. He's essentially asking himself this throughout the book, and he's running away from the answer. He knows the answer, but he's running away. And so I don't know if Chiron necessarily knew the answer. And if he did know the answer, would he run away? So. Wow. Yeah.
You're hitting me right now.
Got deep. We got deep from the ending, but.
No, that's a really good connection there. I haven't read the novel or anything like that, but based off what you described, and
it's a beautiful novel.
Yeah, just that connection is yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm sad to say 2 hours later. 2 hours. Look, it's funny because we said we're like, yeah, we're gonna knock this out in like 45 minutes to an hour, but
we should have known.
When we get on, when we get behind mics, or just when we start talking in general, it's like 2 to 3 hours. It's like almost no stopping. But I'm so glad we really, got to have this conversation about this important, like I said, movie, the best movie of the decade.
Because I want to say that there are a lot of videos on YouTube that you can watch. But they're all 10 to 13 minutes. And while I understand that that's a way for, easy to consume content, who's talking about 2 hours about Moonlight?
Right.
All right.
True.
And, I'm
besides
hyping
like Barry Jenkins, like
besides
when he was
Barry
like
Jenkins,
promoting the
that's
movie
fine.
and
That's
stuff.
fine. You understand that. But I just want to say, not to pat, ourselves on the back, but I mean, just go watch Moonlight. All right.
Go watch Moonlight. It's a beautiful movie. Bravo, to all the actors, Trevante Rhodes, Alex Hibbert, Ashton Sanders, Jerome, the little one who plays Kevin, I don't know his name, and of course Andre Holland. Shout out to Terrell Alvin McCraney. Please make sure to go watch his new show on the Oprah Winfrey Network on OWN called David Makes Man. Beautiful show I started watching. And support Stan Barry Jenkins.
Okay, so I'll kick off the signing off here.
Yeah.
Don't mind me. But we need to make Barry Jenkins a household name. All right, so when you talk about directors, there are household names. Spielberg, Tarantino, people like that.
Jenkins.
Right? David Fincher. We need to look. Barry Jenkins. I mean, he's only made like 3 films, right? So he'll get there. But I want to make sure that Barry Jenkins is a household name. And if you're thinking about, what's his style, what's his signature, think about that those portrait shots that he does that I don't think I've seen anyone else really utilize. Barry Jenkins just knows how to depict people, and the portrait shots is just one way that he does it. Think about just in Moonlight that we talked about with the portrait shot of the mother. Think about all throughout If Beale Street Could Talk. It's just
the jail scenes.
Yeah. It's the jail scenes even. That's a way that he can really show these characters. It's so nice. That's a Barry Jenkins signature. So make Barry Jenkins a household name. That he does have a signature. People should get behind this. He makes great films. Also, he should have been nominated for Best Director last year at the Oscars. But, award shows are just meaningless.
Regina King got Best Supporting Actress.
Yes. So don't mind me, but make Barry Jenkins a household name. Not only support independent film, but support Moonlight. Go watch Moonlight. Thank you.
Don't mind me, but Stan Barry Jenkins and depict Black people in a more human way. Give Black people their flowers and give Black people their dimensionality, because we, after all, this would not exist without Black people. So, we honestly have contributed the most to American society. So please depict us. And I'm not talking to white people, honestly, but give us the platforms and give us the space to let our art flourish, to where Black people and Black creators and Black artists can do this, can depict what they've grown up seeing, what we haven't seen on TV yet. Like I said, Moonlight is not the end. There's only more. It's only up from here. So, well, thank y'all for listening to this.
Yes, thank you.
Stay tuned for more. I know it's been a while, but
we're back.
I hope y'all enjoyed it.
We're back.
We are.